And last one here is overemphasis on academic word lists. I had a student who told me once, oh, I'm learning words from the academic word list. I was thinking that must be really boring and tiring, just going through a never-ending list of one word after another. You're not sure why these words are important, how they're used in context. So there's issues with that, with how decontextualized it is. But also, I would suggest that we are relying on rote learning of individual words instead of drawing connections between words, which helps acquisition. So it's at the expense of focusing on lexical chunks, such as a great deal of. Word families, although I think word families are part of the academic word lists, but it's something, when we introduce new vocabulary, I find it useful to get students to think about, okay, if this is a noun, what does the adjective look like? And collocations, so that's another way of making connections between words. Okay, and moving on to my last area, are misconceptions about the writer's stance. My first one is, again, overemphasis on edging. So I hear EAP practitioners talk about hedging, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, I think it's at the expense of boosting. I don't hear people talk about boosting. So boosting is the opposite of hedging. Hedging is toning down claims. Boosting is underlining claims. And academic writing needs to do both. So there will be more hedging than boosting. Needs to be that they need to be in balance. But we shouldn't give students impression that they should hedge everything. Instead, we should teach them how to calibrate the strength of their claims depending on what evidence they have, and hedge when it's needed and boost when it's appropriate. Another one is overemphasis on reporting verbs. So we teach reporting verbs. We give students perhaps lists of reporting verbs. We tell them how they're different in stance. And again, that's fine, but it's at the expense of non-integral citations. And research has shown that students tend to overuse integral citations with reporting verbs. And Swales 2014 commented, well, that's because we teach them reporting verbs all the time. And this can be an issue for students who are in disciplines that use more non-integral citations than integral if we just overemphasize reporting verbs. Okay, and the last one here is hopefully less controversial now, but I noticed that students are quite obsessed with this. So I've called this prescriptive approaches to the use of I. So students ask me, can I use I in academic writing? And they often have been told before that academic writing doesn't use I, but maybe they read papers in their discipline and see I, and that's why they're asking me. So again, we need to be mindful and avoid being prescriptive and be mindful of disciplinary variation. Okay, so it wasn't 12, was it? My math skills are not that good, I'm afraid. So these were all the misconceptions, and now I'm going to move on. Okay, how do we avoid these misconceptions? What can we draw on to avoid these? So my first one is different conceptualizations of EAP. And I think for us, it's really important that we understand where we are here. So Leah and Street 1998 was a very influential paper that essentially proposed that EAP can be conceptualized in three ways. One is study skills. So study skills means we are teaching students skills in a decontextualized way, not related to the discipline, and we expect them to transfer those skills. So if I teach them how to write an essay, they should be able to write a lab report, right? Doesn't work that way. And this might be an obvious example, but going back to seeing criticality as a transferable skill, seeing argument as having just two sides, that all for me comes from this conceptualization that is very reductive. Now, the second conceptualization of EAP is academic socialization, in which we help students to become members of the academic community and of their disciplinary community. And this is where I sit, and this is where disciplinary differences become very important. And the last conceptualization is academic literacies, which Leah and Street see as superior to the other two, because it focuses on power relations, on identities, on social practices. So essentially, if students can't transfer their knowledge from one context to another, it's because a lot of expectations are hidden, not visible. Now here, I'm referring to academic literacies as conceptualization of EAP, and that's why I'm using capital A and capital L. And I'm distinguishing this from academic literacy, or even literacies without capital letters, when we talk about, oh, I don't teach skills, I teach academic literacy. And that's fine, but it's not the same thing as having this conceptualization of EAP. So like I said, I sit in the academic socialization, and this is where disciplinary differences are very important. And that goes back to Ferguson's epistemology and sociology of disciplines impacting language. And there's a lot of literature on this. So if you look at research papers that look at disciplinary differences, they will try to explain language differences by epistemology and sociology. But I've put in here a forthcoming book-length publication by Bruce and Ding that kind of looks at it the other way around. So it starts with epistemology and sociology, as far as I understand, but the book is not out yet, so I'm not sure. So they're going to look at the intersections between these three aspects. So it might be worthwhile to have a look at it. Okay, another framework I'm going to talk about is approaches to teaching writing and to genre pedagogy. So you will be familiar with approaches to teaching writing as a process and as a product. So if we teach writing as a process, we help students to get through different stages of writing, from generating ideas, through drafting, then revising, etc. If we approach teaching writing as a product, we look at the end product and try to get there. So from the beginning, we're looking at what the end product is. Teaching genre writing is very much the same as product, but specifically it looks at genre conventions. But we can combine process and genre as proposed by Badger and White, as they call process genre. So we can be looking at the end product, the genre that is the target for students, but we help students to get there step by step, from generating ideas through drafting, etc. There are also different approaches to genre pedagogy, and Hyan 96 introduced three main approaches at the time. So that was new rhetoric in the US, or common in the US, systemic functional linguistics, common in Australia, and English for specific approaches, or Swalesian approach after John Swales, common in the UK. Now, there are also others, so I've put in Bawarshi and Reif as more recent and publication and longer with more depth that introduces also additional frameworks. But I'm just going to focus on the Swalesian and the SFL one. So I assume that the Swalesian approach is very common in the UK. So what we do is we analyze samples or exemplars with students. We look at the move structure, we look at the language that is used. And then we kind of assume that once they've had a look at it, they can go and write their own. And for me, it can be quite a big jump for the students, and that's why I'm drawing on SFL here, because the SFL cycle of teaching genres has a step between analysis and students' independent construction, which is joint construction. And that is that students work in groups or one large group with guidance from the teacher and support or without. So essentially, they're helping each other to construct one genre together before they can go off and do it independently. And I really like this from SFL because I think it helps me make the process genre more processed. So I'm not just looking at the end product and assuming that once students have generated ideas, they are ready to draft. I'm not sure if you saw animations. Okay, moving forward to language and content. So what frameworks might be useful here? So going back to that misconception that coherence and cohesion are the same, for me, coherence is about information structure, meaning sentences and paragraphs are typically well constructed if they start with information that is already known to the reader and then move on to information which is new to the reader. And I drawn the framework or the theory developed by the Prague Linguistics Circle, which is called functional sentence perspective. And this uses the words theme and reme, which are also used in SFL, but slightly differently. So for coherence, I do not use SFL, but to put it simply, given information to new information. In cohesion, however, I do use the SFL framework by Halliday and Hassan and their kind of typology of cohesive devices, which they divide into grammatical and lexical and then different types. And finally, complexity. So I mentioned that academic writing as a specific register has complex grammar. And here I'm drawing on the theoretical framework that's called register functional approach, which looks at different registers. And it has been found that spoken language relies on finite clauses. Academic writing relies on complex noun phrases. And there's an intermediate step of non-finite or participle infinitive clauses. And research has also shown that students, as they develop their academic language, they move from finite clauses through non-finite clauses to finally complex noun phrases. So this goes back to that overemphasis on nominalization at the expense of complex noun phrases. Okay, and the last framework is meta-discourse or discourse that allows us to comment on the text, on the discourse. And I use Hyland's model, and here I put a reference to his book, second edition 2019. But there are many other papers, shorter papers by Hyland, which introduce this framework. So essentially, he distinguishes two types of meta-discourse: interactive, that helps the writer make connections within the text, and interactional meta-discourse, which engages the reader and which enables the writer to comment on the content and to take stance.